I kind of want to cover this kind of broader question, like what are frontier technologies and why do we care to work in these spaces? What can they afford us? But probably most as importantly, how we can leverage these affordances in expansive and possibly equitable ways. As I mentioned, this feels like a bit of a homecoming for me. Part of my history with the organization harkens back to 20 years ago when I was part of the kind of national work in preparing teachers to use technology. And does anyone remember this initiative, the PT3 initiative at all? Or was anyone, I might be dating myself, but if you remember this initiative, SITE was the community, yay, Rhonda, one person. SITE was the community where we found each other. So we were all over the United States. There were these initiatives, literally as defined by the name of the national push for this and the federal funding, preparing tomorrow's teachers to use technology. So this is a big infusion of resources and grants in undergraduate education. The part of the project that I was part of was PT3 at Arizona State University. I was a grad student at that time, and it really kind of propelled my work and my thinking and my ideas forward. So I want to start with this idea of frontier technologies, because I feel like this might be one of these catch-all terms where it might be something different to all of us here. And so just in the chat, if you have a minute, I want you to maybe put into the chat what you think of when you think of frontier technologies. The kind of colon of this catch-all term in the theme here is maker, AR, VR, AI technologies. Does this kind of encompass what we're thinking, or does it maybe encompass more than what's mentioned here? Yeah, AR, AI, machine learning. Yep, thanks, Lori. Anything else we should be having on our radar as we're defining this? Yeah, VR. Okay, so I feel like we're on the same page, which is great. Just to kind of give a little bit of orientation of where I'm coming from, I cut my teeth on the PT3 initiative, have been working with technology and teacher education and teacher professional development now for more than 20 years. And I wrote this chapter, as this was published a couple of years ago, where I'm really also orienting myself as a skeptic in this space too, because not because I feel like we are skeptical of technology, but I feel like we are skeptical of the ways in which technology gets used and co-opted and made the goal, but also the reform movement, but also the way in which we kind of are meant to feel like we should be chasing technology, but also using it in really innovative ways. And so I feel like I'm both a champion for these ideas and a skeptic of these ideas. And part of the reason I'm a skeptic is because I feel like we also have this pattern in our spaces, in our field, and across our disciplines of this really exciting habits that we get into of being really enthused about a technology, and then being this technology having a life cycle, and then it gets deserted. And so I've got 3 dates on the screen here: 2005, 2007, 2012. And I'm wondering if anyone remembers any of the big initiatives that were happening in those years at the time, or if those stand out for any particular reason of what we were talking about in those years. 2007 iPhone. Yeah, I actually think iPhone is such a key device that has done a lot to change our the way that we connect and the way that we think about access. I certainly think of it as a great innovation and important technology in our spaces, one-to-one initiatives. Yep, thanks, Lori. So right after the PT3 pushed at kind of 2004, it was a little bit waning, and then there was this push in toward one-to-one devices. So this idea about one laptop per child was occupying our imaginations at the time. And I want to key into that particular initiative first. 2007 is when we were all talking about Second Life, and I don't know if any of you had a character in Second Life. All of our universities were creating worlds in Second Life. Yeah, well, we all had Second Lives. The year of the MOOC by 2012, right? So we are, yeah, taking classes, a really common thing. All our universities like created these rooms, these spaces, these second campuses in Second Life, right? And I'm both critical and I'm enthused about these initiatives for different reasons. But I wanted to ask us kind of a central question about what we think is really going on here. Like what, from your view, might have been some of the aims or aspirations of any of these initiatives? We weren't actually trying to just buy a bunch of technology and put it in kids' hands, right? We were trying to do something bigger. Yeah, flying across the classroom. I do remember Second Life being kind of chaotic for me, and I never really got invested that much into it. But what were we actually trying to do? We weren't trying to just create these other worlds for the sake of it, right? We were trying to do something. We were trying to tap into some of the affordances. And I don't know what comes to your mind, but if people want to maybe populate the chat a little bit, what comes to your mind about what we were trying to do with these initiatives? Personalization, certainly. Yeah, thanks, Rhonda. I think that's a big one. With some of this idea that we can kind of deliver to learners some sort of personalized or inherently meaningful type of learning. Anything else come to mind in the chat here? I'll tell you what kind of came to mind for me as I was reflecting on these. Connectivity, I think, is a big part of this. And I don't think it's an accident that right after One Laptop Per Child, when we saw the iPhone release, people really keyed into this idea about connectivity. And I wonder if that even kind of displaced this idea of one laptop per child, right? Immersion or immersive worlds, right? We think that there's something valuable about this idea of being able to be in an immersive world and it really just capture our imagination. And then finally, this last one is about access, I think, right? And it's not that we've abandoned MOOCs entirely necessarily, but it's that we are having difficulty leveraging what MOOCs can do for us. And we're having difficulty really tapping into all those affordances, right? Learning in the third space. Yeah, I think, Zarina, you've got also your keying into this other idea that let's don't act like our existing spaces are working for everyone. And I think that's also a key thing that we're trying to do here. So while I'm both critical and skeptical of what we do, and that we often see that we get enthused about things and then it goes through a cycle and then it's abandoned and we get enthused about something else. I also think that there's space for us to really think about, well, what is it that we're trying to leverage? What are the affordances we're really keying into here? And so that's going to be some of the theme of this talk going forward. And I also wanted to really draw our attention to these ideas, because in particular, they're showing time and time again the value of technology and how it can be used to make a difference. So I don't just want to like take what I'm talking about and throw it out, because inherently I have devoted a career now toward what can we do with technology that we couldn't do before. So I wanted to then offer now a few position statements and just kind of make these, I think, a little bit explicit before I move on to kind of the main section of my talk here. I think that part of why we might get into trouble when we see an initiative that explodes on the scene or an intervention, and it goes through its cycle of enthusiasm and to desertion. I think that part of why we might get into trouble here is that we try to make technology do too much work for us. It can't be like our goal and our catalyst for change and the solution to our educational problems, right? And I think that maybe we've tried to make it do too much for us. I also think it's important to kind of recognize that technology itself, it's not this homogeneous intervention, right? It's represented by strategies, resources, affordances, approaches, inventions, all of these things that can be leveraged. And yeah, I'm seeing this word tools in the chat, and I think that's really important. At the same time, I think technology is not neutral. There are these historic and current patterns that demonstrate uses of technology. And in some ways they can be used for really wonderful outcomes, but we've also seen examples of technology as tools of oppression, exploitation, and marginalization. Technology can support ambitious learning practices, and this is what I'm gonna take the turn for for the rest of my talk today. We want students to engage in consequential learning with and about technology. And the benefits of any technology should be felt by everyone, and equitable pathways can and must be intentionally expanded. So these last three boxes on the screen, the bottom three, are the three that I'm gonna kind of focus on today for the talk today. I want to go through next how I'm envisioning and thinking about the work that I've done and the way that I think about this work now. But I want to, so I kind of want to unpack a few things, but then the second, or I guess the third part of the talk here will be about some of the examples and how this gets exhibited across 3 different projects. So that's where I'm going with this. So I want to talk about what I'm calling, or what my colleague Cindy Mello-Silver and I are calling, a framework for ambitious learning practices. And we kind of define ambitious learning practices as this kind of range of practices where kids can engage in consequential and inherently meaningful learning work. And I'm going to unpack that a little bit in a moment here too. I envision this, what you're seeing on the screen, is kind of descriptive of the work I've been doing. And so it's grounded in a little bit of the journey that I've taken to get to this point. And it's also informed and grounded by a lot of different theorists and researchers operating in these spaces as well. So that's kind of how I'm positioning this work, but I want to unpack what we're seeing on the screen first. As it kind of highlighted, as I always highlight in my bio, I am the editor of the Interdisciplinary Journal of Problem-Based Learning. I've been working in problem-based learning as long as I've been doing this work with technology and technology integration. And that's kind of been the main pedagogical frame that I always reach for. But I'm also talking about deep collaborative inquiry here as kind of this class of inquiry-based learning methods that both engage learners in collaborative problem solving, but reflect also the authenticity of the discipline. And the reason that I think that that's important is because whatever discipline we might be operating in or working with teachers within their disciplines, they may not find that like a specific model such as problem-based learning or case-based learning works within their discipline. And more than likely in whatever discipline that a teacher is operating in or has goals for, there's a model of inquiry or authentic inquiry that is really connected to and linked to that discipline. So that, for example, with literary analysis, with English language arts, there's a history and a set of practices associated with that. And problem-based learning isn't going to work for that teacher, like the kind of signature pedagogies of problem-based learning. Science inquiry, when we talk about inquiry in science, there's kind of a set of norms and practices. So I wanted this idea of deep collaborative inquiry to really reflect that it should also be inherently authentic to the discipline. Oh, okay, Zarina, you're saying something kind of consequential here in the chat. Design thinking practices cross a lot of boundaries. And yep, I think that when we talk about design thinking, what we're also referencing there, I think, is this idea that we can engage in forms of authentic design within whatever discipline that we're talking about as well. So yeah, part of this work, the way that it manifests is in partnership and co-design with teachers, and I found that to be one of the key ways that we can be able to find personal, local, cultural relevance in our pedagogies. And to offer opportunity for students and teachers together to create this sense of group belonging. So I'm drawing on some specific people here with these ideas, but it's kind of this marriage between co-design and culturally relevant pedagogies, where I think we might be able to start to start to see the first manifestations of equitable learning pathways start to form. And it's at this intersection of how we design and co-design with teachers, how they understand practices and their own practices to need to have cultural relevance and local relevance. And because we as university partners can't anticipate all the ways in which local relevance or cultural relevance or personal relevance can be achieved, we first start with kind of a shared understanding of that and what we might want to work with together with teachers. But I think all of this, I'm going to argue, needs to happen in co-design with teachers. I think that another important piece of this is complex and consequential learning. And I'm really referencing two ideas here. These kind of challenging practices or challenging pedagogies that will close pedagogical gaps. I'm referencing the pedagogical gap specifically here because I think that it's important to recognize that in some spaces and in particularly where we see spaces or classrooms where there's access to technology, but it's not used in consequential or inherently meaningful ways, we tend to see that those spaces can be characterized or can be true of students where many of the populations are marginalized in some way or underrepresented in some way. So these one laptop per child initiatives or these kind of one-to-one device initiatives have infused our classrooms with a lot of technology, but that doesn't mean that what has come out of that are these inherently and personally meaningful kinds of pedagogies where students feel like their voices and their needs and their goals and their interests are centered. And so I think that it's important to take a stance where the work that we do and how we do it can maybe start to close pedagogical gaps so that all kids have the opportunity to engage in meaningful and complex problem solving. And I think that this is then coupled with the ideas of reinforcing student agency, nurturing their voice, promoting student authority, giving over some of this responsibility to learners, but also fostering it within those spaces. Okay, so I also want to talk about how and why we were going to leverage frontier technology in these spaces. And what I'm referencing here are tools for students and tools for teachers. So let me talk about students first. Again, you're seeing these ideas, I think, because they also intersect. Authenticity, agency, and authority. I think that we should be creating space and empowering learners to experience all of these things. Collaboration and connection, again, sense of belonging and an ability to engage in meaning making or sense making that feels personal. And I'm going to talk and show some examples about this. I'm going to leave this here for now. And then I'm going to kind of point to how we might be placing these technologies, tools, application strategies, resources in the hands of teachers, again, to foster meaningful learning and student success. So these are the kinds of, in the class of technologies that offer us affordances for managing complexities, taking advantage of productive qualities of frontier technologies, and again, charting a variety of learning pathways. So next, I want to turn attention to distributed scaffolding. And so what I mean by this is kind of this interplay between teacher-student practices, kind of coupled with technological resources, all of this that can be leveraged to engage in a set of scaffolding practices. So some of the goals for this are going to be to structure the task complexity or problematize learning in some way. And those two are kind of held in contrast. Structuring task complexity, I think, references what we think of as a very common definition of scaffolding, where we really want to make the learning easier and more accessible to students. Whereas problematizing is the set of practices where we're really challenging learners to go deeper. In some way, we're trying to make it harder and more challenging for them. Because especially if a learner is satisfied with a surface level of understanding, in a case where we want them to go deeper with their understanding, we want to problematize that in some ways. And then we also want to enable and scaffold their ability to assume responsibility. So this kind of a notion of transferring responsibility to learners. What I think that this can lead us to is disciplinary identification. And I think that's another key equity move. Oops, let me go back. Disciplinary identification references kind of how learners come to identify with a discipline, how entry points for seeing that discipline as relevant can be expanded and ensure equitable participation. And what we're really trying to do with the disciplinary identification is empower learners through consequential roles and actions, and then again, tap their existing interests. We're really trying to tap ideas about relevance, local, personal, culturally relevant. And so this is kind of where the discipline and their own interests might intersect. And so it feels, again, like they see themselves as an actor, like a person in the world who's doing science and acting in a way that science feels really relevant to them. And it feels like it's personally meaningful to them. So it's kind of both this intersection of meaningful and consequential science, as well as their own inherent interests in some way. So that's when I think I and others have argued that this is where disciplinary identification happens. So across this, what we're talking about here, you can see that, as I mentioned, this is kind of descriptive of a lot of the projects I've engaged in and I'm going to be talking about today. So it's partially descriptive of what I think our team and our group is doing, but it's also grounded in some of these ideas about who's doing what in these spaces. And I'm trying to synthesize how this is operating in the spaces here. So I want to talk about a project now that I think is reflects what I've been talking about, where we were able to achieve most of what's on the screen here, from deep collaborative inquiry through distributed scaffolding, but I've kind of grayed out disciplinary identification, but I don't think we achieved that with this project I'm about to talk about, and I have some insights into why. And so that's what I want to go with the first kind of example I want to talk about. But before I get to an example, are there any questions or any points in which people want me to clarify something or elaborate on anything? I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but I'm hoping that you're getting the sense that to use the chat. I am checking the chat, so if something pops in there, I'll definitely try to address it. So let me set the context of what this project is was accomplishing. We were setting out to partner with some teachers we've been working with local to Bloomington, Indiana, Bloomington Project School, which is a locally chartered charter school. So it's chartered here out of the local district. So it operates sort of as a magnet school, sort of as an alternative school, sort of as a lab school. It's a K-8 school that is also multi-age. So in this case, we were partnering with the middle school, which is grades 6, 7, and 8. And the two teachers that we were working with, Terry and Scott, who teach all subjects in grades 6, 7, and 8. So they teach across the discipline. Terry has a PhD, Scott, and both of them have a number of years of experience. So this is part of an ongoing project by two teachers who are highly motivated to do really ambitious things. And so here's what we set out to do. Okay. So here's the setup of the classroom. This is the kind of, if you can imagine, this is a double classroom. There's 60 students in this class. It can be partitioned off with partitions, but and here's kind of their makerspace as it has taken shape over the years. This is, some of the maker technology that you're seeing here are a laser cutter and a 3D printer, as well as tools, resources. Yeah, everything that you're seeing here, this is how these teachers were engaging and the resources they had in their classroom. You can see this kind of bank of computers along the wall. So this is a very design-oriented, maker-oriented classroom. And here's what we set out to do with these students. We were asking a question that took shape, an inquiry question over the course of almost a full academic year. What do safe and resilient food systems look like? In the fall semester, they did a study of food systems, intensive reads. In the spring semester, they looked at labor and labor practices and labor movements. And then they built, each team built a food system. And so what we're seeing are how these manifested. These are aquaponics systems. And you can see on the screen that there's this kind of, in most of their systems, is a 3-tier system. On the bottom of their system is a aquarium. And that's an aquarium with fish. On the top of the system, there's a filtering mechanism that filters water down to what's in the middle tier there, which is a grow bed. So the idea is that they were kind of creating these systems where they could pump the water up to some sort of filtering mechanism that would filter down to a plant grow bed, and then filter back into the system itself. So this was their pump mechanism. We had the idea that in the outset that we could probably engage some sort of maker technologies, and didn't know quite how it was going to take shape or what those would be until we started noticing problems with the systems. And the problems we were noticing were that kids had too much water in their systems, and if they weren't monitored closely enough, they would cause a flood. So that, you know, they didn't know how to monitor the right water levels of their systems, and in the filtering mechanisms that would hold water, if they didn't hold water like they predicted, too much water would go into the tank below and it would cause a flood. Some of the floods were minor and some were not minor. Some were bigger, and you know, this is a second floor classroom, and so some of the water at times was found in the first floor classroom. So we wanted to address that problem. And then the other problem we wanted to address were the feeding schedules of the systems, so that over the weekend, the fish could reliably be fed. And then there was a third problem we were trying to address, which was the temperature levels of the water, because students chose different fish with different temperature requirements. And so here's how we did that. We did it by leveraging a host of maker technologies. So we were building sensors for the water temperature, sensors for the water levels, in accounting for the offset of the whole entire water that was in their system, and sensors, automated feeding mechanisms. And so we started by kind of planning out the systems that they could build. The next stage was wiring, coding, designing, 3D printing these, and then testing and trying them out and troubleshooting, and then to the final installation of the sensors and the automatic feeder. So that's where we went with this project. One of the some of the things that we published out of this, we published a design case with the teachers, just kind of describing that. That's not actually on the screen here. We also looked at some of the ways that the scaffolding practices unfolded. And so some of this research has been published out of this project. But I want to talk about some of the insights that we've kind of gleaned from this work. And you know, really kind of connecting back, I think that what the frontier technologies did for us was afforded multiple pathways for kids to achieve that sense making, that because they were noticing problems, they were able to try to solve those problems. But what the technology did was offer both a solution, but also a mediating pathway, because all of a sudden they're able to say, okay, the water that I have in my system is this much water, but the water that is or the water in my tank is this much water, but the water that's in my whole entire system is this much water. And then over time that evaporates. So being able to kind of build sensors that would alert them to these issues when, and really being able to key into, well, what are the thresholds and the parameters of when I want to be alerted about a low water level? Because we know what happens with a high water level is a flood, a mini or a maxi flood. Well, but what do I want to be alerted about, and when do I want to be alerted about a low water level? We think that consequential learning happened, and we think it was meaningful for the students. They had tremendous agency and authority in this work. We saw tremendous amounts that we're able to document and publish about the types of scaffolding that we observed in the environment and forms of scaffolding that we hadn't anticipated. And we think that there are a lot of takeaways for this. But I'll also say the reason that I think that we really didn't achieve disciplinary identification is I just don't think that what we were doing was tapping into what it is that learners care about their communities, what they think about. And so I'm getting to this idea here that I don't think that the PBL design and the scaffolding were enough in this to really get at what I think is a really key equity move, which is going back to the idea of disciplinary identification. I want to talk about now another project where I think we're starting to get closer, although that's maybe a little bit optimistic view because this project is not very far along yet. So I want to talk about, oh, okay, actually, let me go back to why I also think we didn't make it to this idea of disciplinary identification in the Aquaponics project. And part of why I think we didn't get all the way there is we focused a lot on kind of what's in the middle of the screen here. And I don't think that we really thought about or kind of could account for what is it that's inherently meaningful to the learners. So that's kind of what I want to say about that. And I think we're starting to get at that with this next project I'm going to talk about, which is primary AI. Primary AI is a complete right turn. So this is leveraging a completely different set of technologies. So we're trying to integrate artificial intelligence into elementary school science with immersive problem-based learning. And the idea behind this project is that we think that artificial intelligence is something that kids are inherently interested in. We think that they're consumers of artificial intelligence even before they know that they are. And we think that there's value in teaching them to be both critical of artificial intelligence, but also knowing about what artificial intelligence is and what it can do. So the motivation here is artificial intelligence with a conservation approach to life sciences. And this is being done in the real world. Scientists are often building and deploying different forms of AI technologies to study and understand different ecology problems. In this case, we're building an immersive world for learners, and the world we're building for them is there's an inherent problem, and it's a real problem. Off the southern coast of the South Island of New Zealand, there's a warm water penguin called the yellow-eyed penguin, and this penguin is in decline in the real world. And there are a number of reasons why this penguin is in decline and why it's being threatened. And we're tasking the kids to understand, well, what is it? What's going on, and what can we do about it? So the way that they understand that is they build and deploy a robo penguin to help them to understand what is going on in the colony. This because the yellow-eyed penguin is also a very shy penguin. And so anytime that researchers try to understand the problem, they usually cause more disturbance than they learn about the penguin. So we're calling this game-based learning meets problem-based learning, and through teacher co-design. So this is one of our teachers kind of early in the project, pre-COVID, and she's working with us to think about how to foster, an effective and engaging learning experience with problem-based learning, compelling narrative, believable characters, and adaptive feedback. We are engaging ideas about what we're calling collaborative inquiry play that's authentic and meaningful, scaffolded, and flexible and durable in the ability for students to access it. And we're establishing individual cultural social relevance through co-design for local adaptation. So we've got right now 4 teachers that we're working with, 2 in rural Indiana, one that's local to Bloomington here, one in Bloomington, and one in Indianapolis, in downtown Indianapolis. And we're really asking this broad question. So we've got this existing problem in these materials that we're building in this immersive world for kids, grades 3 through 5. But at the kind of teacher material encounter, there's also a lot of room for local adaptation. And when that happens, that's where we think we can tap into kids' inherent interests and problems that they care about So what's the local adaptation that we really want to layer and integrate with these ideas? So let me talk a little bit about how this takes shape. So what we've posed to the kids is a real question is what's causing the decline of the yellow-eyed penguin? How can we use our knowledge of science and artificial intelligence to help without causing any harm? So we are integrating ideas in this kids population study with conservation. We're and giving them skills for AI planning, computer vision, AI ethics, and machine learning. And the way that this unfolds in the classroom, and as we've mapped it out, is there's kind of science in the top and AI on the bottom, and we do, and so it's this set of back and forth between science instruction and in real time in the classroom, and then they do these quests. And so the quests themselves are kind of these fixed things that involve, you know, the immersive world and the imaginary world, where in the population studies of the penguins. So they learn about first the yellow-eyed penguin, its habitat, they learn about adaptation, and they engage ideas about AI planning and AI ethics in the classroom, and then they do a quest on AI planning. And then in the classroom, they also learn about what's interfering with the habitat, conditions, challenges, and they learn about computer vision. Also, AI ethics are engaged at every level. And then they engage a quest of the penguin and engage computer vision tools. And then back to the classroom, science class, data, modeling, limiting factors. Then we introduce them to ideas about machine learning. And then they continue, quest 3 will have a focus on machine learning. And then they generate a plausible solution. So this is how the cycle unfolds in the classroom. So here's a screen of what they are doing with AI planning. So this is a set where they have to define like initial states, possible actions, what they want they've been tasked to help program their robo penguin to take photographs of of either the beach or the nesting grounds or the feeding grounds. So they get to decide where do they want to, and what do they want to learn about. So they have to define initial states, possible actions, and goal states. And so they do this through sort of drag and drop and kind of drawing from ideas about, you know, programming where we've seen these, but it's all drag and drop for them, right? And then they deploy their penguin, their robo penguin, and it goes out on the quest, and then they find out if they're successful and they can adjust their plan as necessary. So we've done some early field testing with where we're at so far. Kids, of course, you know, they find that they really like it. One of our struggles with this project so far is there aren't real good assessment tools. So we're also building assessment tools to find out what it is they really learn about AI. But so far, it's been really well received in the classroom. We're 2 years into this project. We are finding that we need to really allow and invest a lot of time for teachers, because this is now a situation where teachers are unfamiliar with the content and the context that we're asking them. AI is new for the teachers and the kids. And this thread of AI ethics is where we're finding really common ground, and the teachers get excited about that and the students get excited about it. We're engaging a wide range of unplugged and activities and demonstrations. I'm going to set that one aside for a second, talk about that in a moment. Building shared understandings among our partners at for local, personal, and cultural relevance. And because we've intentionally chosen these 3 different sites of rural Indiana, small city Indiana, but with a small university town, and everything that we know about a context like that, and urban section of Indianapolis, what we're finding is that we have to have shared understandings of what it means to build curricula that's locally relevant, that's personally meaningful to kids, but also taps into cultural relevance as well. And then we're finding that it's really inspiring that we could challenge ideas, the students with complex ideas and content. They've really come along with this. But I want to get back to this kind of bottom left part of the grid here. And I think that part of why we're seeing some success is because we're engaging this range of unplugged and plugged activities, where we found that there can be really wide range of ability to do different things in the classrooms in the different contexts is through this thread of AI ethics. And AI ethics is what affords us the ability to also engage kids in questions of, well, what is ethical AI? How do we know that we're doing ethical AI with the penguins and our population study of the penguins? And then what will we expect of AI to be ethical as we interact with it? What will we ask of it? What will we expect of it? But also, where is AI have the potential for harm in our lives? And so kids are really, really attached to this idea. Of course, anytime you engage kids with, notions of what's right and what's wrong, we're gonna be able to capture some imaginations there. So that's where we've seen where we've seen kids and the ability to really tap into ideas about relevance is how we think about, at this teacher material encounter, building on the shared understandings and our goals for local, personal, and cultural relevance is where we've seen that the teachers have a lot of leeway to modify and draw in locally relevant examples and conversations. Okay, so the third project I want to talk about, and then we can take some questions here. This is Eco Journeys, and Eco Journeys is the project in which I feel like we're doing consequential things for learners and for teachers together, but also this is the project that's furthest along. So the premise of Eco Journeys is, again, it's an immersive world. Kids are transported to a fictionalized island. We're calling this island Buglos, in the Philippines, and they are on a field trip, and then they're asked to help kind of someone common to their age, but whose family is running a tilapia farm. They're asked to help. He enlists their help, like, can you help me to figure out what's going on here? We have to do a lot of investigations and do a lot of water testing because the tilapia are dying. So kids are enlisted in kind of a co-partner to Diwa, whose family runs a fishing farm here. Great, so this is their adventure. Sorry, no, Diwa is not the local age mate. He's the father of the family that's helping them to figure out what's going on. So they learn about tilapia, they learn about the conditions under which tilapia may or may not, may thrive or might get sick. And they do a lot of consequential science learning. And then, so they perform all these investigations in the world. So here's some examples. And then they also work collaboratively in what we're calling a tide board, but that's not as important here, where they take from their notes, they talk about what's relevant to an explanation, and they come to agreement about relevance of what they've observed in the world. So they do individual investigations, collect information, come to a collaborative board here, and they work together to work out their ideas, come up with explanations of why they might be observing what they are observing, and what are the scientific explanations behind that. We've talked and written a lot about both the framework and the scaffolding tools that we've built in this context and published out of some of this work. But a really key phase then is we're trying to take what we're learning and what we can glean from student actions and events in the game, and we're building out what we're calling this orchestration assistant. So what you're seeing on the screen is kind of our wireframe storyboards that we're in the process of building now, based on what we've observed teachers doing with eco journeys and how we now know kids engage. And then the metrics that we're able to take and capture in game, the question is, what if we can make those metrics and student actions and team actions actionable for teachers and give teachers specific insights? If you've worked with problem-based learning, you know that one of the kind of most challenging aspects of this is managing multiple groups at once. And so we're trying to give teachers access to some of those insights. So from the in-game analytics, can we make that actionable to teachers? So some of the insights that we're trying to really key into here are giving teachers specific information into things that we think are a teacher is going to want to know about, right? So here we're going to alert a teacher if the teacher wants to know what's going on with group 2. We're going to have a report that the teacher can access. they're all at this Tide board, and there's unequal participation. And so they're getting a report about participation at the Tide board. The assumption here is that a teacher is going to know about what this unequal participation might mean. Maybe there's an explanation for this unequal participation. Ryan left early to go to the dentist, right? Not a big deal. Maybe there's meaning behind this, that maybe the meaning is Ryan almost never participates. He added a note, that's more than usual. Good job, Ryan. Let me go find out what's going on. Or maybe it's not typical for Ryan, but the assumption here is we're not assuming that there's something inherently deficient about Ryan here. We're assuming that what we can do is empower teachers to understand that the kind of reports that they're given can be interpreted by them and should be thought of as information that may or may not be consequential, right? That we don't know if this information is important to tend to or not, right? So other things that we're going to be issuing to teachers are, again, let's say that the observation is unequal participation. Teachers could push a prompt to the group. There's a suggested prompt here. What strategies can we use to make sure that everyone is participating? Or the teacher can type their own prompt. So in these cases, we're going to have some pre-selected prompts for teachers to push, or the ability for them to push their own prompts to the group. And then we're also envisioning kind of an end of day set of reports where the system can also give teachers access to information and summary. Some of the key principal insights that are driving this work, and so far what we're gaining is insight into how we're imagining and co-designing for disciplinary identification at every distinct stage of this project and partnership cycle. So again, we're thinking about this as an immersive world, and again, students as consequential actors in this world. We're breaking a few human-computer interaction commandments to achieve inclusive practices. So we're overly elaborating. We're providing overly redundant opportunities for teachers to gain insight into groups, and overly redundant opportunities for students to access the content, the investigations, the different investigations that they have to perform. And we're expanding the norms of what gets reported to the teachers in order to not reinscribe ideas about fast or slow learners or normal versus abnormal learners, right? What we're really trying to do here is we're trying to leverage what technologies now afford us to do, which is the kinds of insights that help us to characterize a pathway for a learner, and then empower a teacher to be able to say, that's a good pathway for that learner, or that's a pathway that needs me to kind of give that pathway some attention, right? So we're trying to really get away from this idea because of what the technologies afford us to do, of saying or attaching value judgments to the reports. And then we're leveraging, I think, a lot of different forms of technology in this project for teachers and students, expansive models and representations of student understanding again, and then practices made actionable for teachers. You know, and so I'm going to kind of close off here, take questions. I do want to say that this is still a rough draft of these ideas, but I think that it's really critical that if we're not designing intentionally and partnering with teachers for equitable pathways along every kind of stage of our process, then I think we're not going to get quite there. And I think that we can envision what we're doing as the ability to expand pathways and offer opportunity to students for equitable engagement at many different stages of our work. But again, I think that this is both descriptive of part of our process. It's grounded in some ideas and theoretical and research work, both our own and of course, many of the important consequential work that's being done in this area, but do think of this as a rough draft at this stage as well. So I want to thank you and this community. This is such a great community. Some lingering questions we're still asking, what extent equity moves are addressed in partnership and co-design, and design itself and implementation considerations. And we're also asking what else is necessary. So super interested in any thoughts y'all might have of that or any other questions that I can answer for you about our products and the work that's going on here in our work. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and open up to questions, thoughts, ideas, and friendly faces that we see in this. So here in the chat, let's see what we got. How are you adapting to the teachers? Right.
So, Krista, what I mean by that is I know that within school systems, and you're doing this, and you mentioned that the teachers were struggling a little bit. And so, trying to do all the professional development you're trying to do. So are you paying teachers extra for professional development? Are you getting them on board? How are you doing that? What are you doing?
Yeah, right. So I think one key to this is we are partnering with teachers individually. So we started with some of the work that we're doing and trying to partner with schools and school districts or individual schools. And then that's its own set of strengths and weaknesses associated with it. But what we found for these particular kinds of projects, that the key is partnering with teachers individually. So already we've got a teacher that's half the way there. They want to be there. And yes, we pay for professional development. Summer institutes, like these are all kind of partnerships that unfold over multiple years. We don't think of it as like we train teachers for a year and then starting in the summer and then throughout the year, and then we get a new batch of teachers the next summer. Teachers that want to stay with us are invited to stay with us for multiple years, and some have turned into mentor teachers for us. So I think that's one thing. But then another thing, we pay them. We have release time for them. So some of our days are full long. We're gonna sit and be on virtual whiteboards together and get these ideas mapped out, what's gonna work for you in the classroom. So we also pay for release time in those instances as well, where we need, lots of work and labor all in one place. So that's how we're doing it. Those aspects would be really hard to do without the funding, but I'll say about the Aquaponics project that I talked about first. That project was accomplished with $5,000 of seed funding from just our university. It was not more than $5,000 for those aquaponic systems and all of the tools associated with it. And that was just a mini grant from our university. So, which is not, that's not nothing, obviously, but it also is not this high cost. The other two projects are multi-million-dollar grants because the Immersive Worlds are so expensive to build.
Right.
So, yeah.
It's really fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing, and your work is fascinating. So thank you.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me. I really appreciate this community, and I really appreciate all the work that's going on here, and always seeing familiar faces. So.